It was late at night when the top floor of the Morgan and Carter building, one of the most influential and feared law firms in the country, fell into a deep silence, broken only by the distant sound of a vacuum abruptly turned off and the light footsteps of a solitary figure. Emily Dawson pushed the cleaning cart with precise, nearly soundless movements, as if she were dancing between shadows and hallways. The floor gleamed under the cold ceiling lights, and the marble reflected her focused, tired but alert expression. She knew that place as if it were a second skin. Every desk, every frame, every scratch on the fine wood that no one else seemed to notice. She chose to be invisible. The less she was noticed, the better her chances of keeping that job and maintaining the bare minimum of stability. And it was precisely in that anonymity that something about to change her life decided to appear. When she entered a private room at the end of the hallway, different from the others due to its dark wooden door with a matte gold finish, Emily noticed something was slightly off. She couldn't say exactly what it was. Maybe the air, thicker, still. Maybe the smell, a mix of leather, dried ink, and something old. Or maybe it was the way the desk lamp, left on, cast strange shadows on the walls. She scanned the room, eyeing the pristine furniture, the heavy books that filled every corner with titles in Latin and brown leather spines. She approached a side shelf to dust it off, and as she ran the cloth over the books, something gave way with a faint click. One of the volumes was loose, or perhaps misplaced. When she pulled it to adjust, she heard a dull sound behind the shelf. Curious, she knelt, carefully pushed it, and found an old envelope there, yellowed with time, hidden between a false back and the wooden wall. Emily's heart began to race. Her fingers hesitated for a moment, but curiosity, that old spark that moved her even against her will, spoke louder. She opened the envelope carefully, almost reverently. The paper inside trembled in her hands, not just from how long it had been hidden, but because it seemed to carry something heavier than ink. It was a handwritten letter. The feminine handwriting, elegant and rushed, leapt from the lines with urgency. Emily read, and with each sentence, her eyes widened. The letter spoke of secrets, of guilt, of decisions made under pressure, of a child that had been left behind, and of a truth that could ruin an empire. But she stopped before the end. The last sentence, written in trembling strokes, seemed to scream from the page. Emily turned pale. Her lips parted. She should not have found that. She should not have opened it. But now, it was already too late. During the day, no one knew her name. She passed through the hallways like a shadow between the marble-covered walls and the closed doors of the prestigious Carter and Hale firm. At night, when the expensive shoes had vanished and the phones had gone silent, that's when Emily Dawson finally existed. In the muffled hum of the vacuum, in the creak of waxed stairs, in the soft swish of the microfiber cloth over desks that would never be hers. There was something almost ceremonial in the way she cleaned that cold environment, not out of pleasure, but from a kind of silent pact with survival. With each floor she cleaned, she earned one more day of rent, another month of food, another week of anonymity, and it was precisely that anonymity that made her feel safe. Invisible, she didn't have to explain why she avoided eye contact, nor why she sometimes paused a few extra seconds in front of the old photos on the partner's shelves, as if searching for something, or someone. Emily didn't live, she floated. She lived in a small rented back room in the city's suburbs, with windows that faced an alley, and walls that absorbed the winter cold as easily as they absorbed the silence of her solitude. Every night, after her shift, she took the nearly empty subway, a book in hand, and a mind full of stories she'd never dared to tell. Her notebooks, kept inside a worn-out backpack, were filled with notes, loose phrases, poetic thoughts she scribbled while waiting for the instant noodles to boil. Writing was the only place where she could fully exist, where her pain became metaphor, and where the past, no matter how painful, gained a certain beauty. Even though she worked in a world where words were used to earn fortunes, contracts, petitions, court trials, the only words that really mattered to Emily were the ones that flowed from her pen in the silent hours of the night. Life had taught her how to survive with little. Raised by her grandmother, who sold cakes to supplement her retirement, she learned early not to rely on promises or on the kindness of others. Her parents had vanished from her life like smoke, leaving behind only a birth certificate and an unexplainable emptiness. But it was the disappearance of her older brother, when she was just 10, that permanently shaped how she viewed the world. He had gone out to buy bread and never returned. The police found no leads. Her grandmother grew old, waiting for answers that never came. Emily grew up surrounded by faded posters and increasingly long silences at the breakfast table. The open wound never healed. It was only covered by layers of resignation. And even now, so many years later, she still felt that absence as if it were a part of her body that had never formed. On good days, Emily dreamed of studying literature. She wanted to understand the power of stories better, maybe even write her own. On bad days, she was content with going unnoticed. She feared being seen because being seen meant being questioned, and she had answers to almost nothing. She feared losing her job, being judged for not escaping that silent spiral of poverty and grief. Above all, she feared becoming irrelevant before even discovering who she was. Still, there was a force that kept pushing her forward, an inner flame fueled by something greater than hope. Maybe it was a need for justice. Maybe it was longing turned into stubbornness. Whatever it was, it kept her standing night after night, even when her body begged for rest and her soul pleaded for peace. That particular night, after finding the mysterious letter, something inside Emily had shifted. The feeling of having violated something sacred, of having accessed words that weren't meant for her, mixed with the unsettling suspicion that the letter was, somehow, connected to her. She couldn't explain it, but the words she read pulsed in her mind with an uncomfortable familiarity, as if they were tied to that part of her story that had always remained in the shadows. She tried to ignore it, tried to forget, but as she walked through the dark hallways, the letter seemed to burn inside her backpack, like an unwanted secret, one she hadn't chosen, but that had now chosen her. It was as if fate, tired of waiting, had finally decided to knock on her door. Alexander Carter was a man who commanded respect even from a distance. At 35, his presence alone could silence a room. Always dressed in perfectly tailored suits and wearing a watch worth more than a full year's salary for most of his employees, he moved like someone who had already lost more than he was willing to reveal. Heir to a legal empire built by 3 generations of men who didn't accept weakness as an option, Alexander seemed to have been born with the burden of never showing emotion. His routine was timed to the second, his gestures measured, his words precise. Nothing slipped past his control, not the most complex cases, not the most fickle allies, nor the opponents who dared to face him in court. They said he won his first major case at just 26, dismantling an international corruption network with a single closing argument. Since then, no one dared underestimate him. But behind the frosted glass doors of his office, there was something he couldn't silence. A ghost from the past, a mistake that was never corrected, a pain that refused to fade with time. His gaze, though firm, sometimes betrayed a quiet, almost imperceptible sorrow, the kind of sorrow only recognized in those who've learned to smile with their eyes closed. Alexander carried the weight of an important name on his shoulders, but it was in the silence of his own thoughts that the true sentence resided. Few knew it, but for years, he had been conducting a parallel investigation, not legal, but personal, a quiet search for something or someone who had vanished when he was too young to grasp the meaning of loss. It wasn't just ambition that drove him. It was the attempt to fill a void no success, no matter how great, could conceal. His relationship with the employees was marked by an almost formal distance. No one dared interrupt him without permission, and his instructions always came in short, definitive sentences. He was respected, but not loved, admired, but not approachable. There was a rumor in the hallways that Alexander had never emotionally involved himself with anyone, inside or outside of work. It was as if he had built a fortress around himself, not just to keep others out, but to keep something, or someone, locked inside. His office reflected that isolation. The walls were lined with shelves filled with impeccably arranged law books, abstract paintings in muted tones, and a desk always spotless, except for a single picture frame turned face down, which no one dared touch. In the rare moments when he allowed any contact with the world outside his power bubble, Alexander showed signs of a restrained humanity. He liked to walk late at night through the deserted downtown streets, as if searching for something lost. On these solitary strolls, with no security, no phone, no schedule, he seemed more man than myth, more wounded than ruthless. But he would soon return to his usual rigidity, as if he couldn't afford to appear vulnerable for too long. Every decision he made was calculated. every gesture shielded by an almost cruel logic. Perhaps that's why no one noticed that. Even with all his control, there was a blind spot in his life, a crack that was about to be unexpectedly pried open by the most unlikely person of all. Alexander didn't know it yet, but the letter Emily had found, and which now rested inside her backpack, was not just an administrative error or a coincidence. It was the link between two interrupted pasts, a piece of truth that had slipped out of his control and landed in the hands of someone who was never meant to be part of his world, or so he thought. But fate, with its sense of irony, had already made its next move, and the man used to winning battles in the courtroom would soon discover that the heart is a tribunal where logic holds no ground. On that rainy early morning, while the city lights cast trembling reflections on the mirrored windows of the building, Emily quietly slid down yet another hallway. Her steps, always light, barely made a sound on the thick carpet. She was tired, as she was every night, but there was something different in the air, a subtle premonition, an intuition she couldn't name, but which made her hesitate for a second before opening the door to the most feared office in the building, Alexander Carter's. She had never been there alone for so long. The environment radiated authority. Every corner of that room seemed calculated to keep intruders at bay. But that night, something pulled her in. An envelope, partially hidden beneath a pile of documents, caught her eye. It wasn't official. It was aged, yellowed with time, as if it had been purposely forgotten there, and for some reason she couldn't explain. Emily picked it up with trembling hands. The envelope was sealed with dark wax and bore a name written by hand. It wasn't Alexander's, nor anyone she recognized. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, almost poetic. This wasn't part of a standard file. It was personal. Instinctively, she slipped it into her backpack, more out of impulse than intention. She felt the weight of that decision seconds later, as she left the office, and the sound of the door closing behind her echoed like a warning. Her heart beat faster, as if she had crossed an invisible line that separated the world of neutrality from the territory of danger. Back in the locker room, Emily hesitated for several minutes before opening the envelope. When she finally did, she didn't expect the words inside to shake her world. The letter wasn't long, but it carried devastating force. It spoke of regrets, of choices that had ruined lives, of a secret hidden for decades to protect someone who never knew the truth. The signature at the end belonged to a name she recognized, one of the firm's founders, dead for years, but the content seemed directed to someone else. Between the lines, it revealed connections that bordered on the unbelievable, dates that matched important moments from her childhood, mentions of a disappearance, of a child taken by mistake, of a silence enforced in the name of honor and reputation. Emily read and reread the letter, trying to find mistakes, but everything pointed to one single disturbing possibility. That letter was somehow connected to her own story, and perhaps, in some inexplicable way, to her brother's disappearance. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The letter now weighed more than the world. She tried to rationalize, to look for explanations, to convince herself that maybe she was misinterpreting everything. But the words from the letter kept echoing in her mind like an unfinished melody. She knew she couldn't just return it. This was more than private correspondence. It was a key, a crack in a wall she had always believed was unbreakable. What she didn't yet know was that by keeping that paper, she had taken the first step toward a destiny that would change not only her life, but also that of the man she feared the most, and who, ironically, might be the missing piece of a puzzle they both carried unknowingly. Emily, who had always chosen invisibility as a means of survival, now stood at the edge of a path that would demand courage, truth, and choices that defied the heart. And although she didn't know it yet, that simple act of curiosity was about to bring her face to face with Alexander himself, not as an anonymous cleaning lady, but as the keeper of a secret that could redeem or destroy everything. In the days that followed, Emily began to see the world with different eyes. The building where she once drifted like a silent shadow now felt like a labyrinth of secrets ready to unravel. Every room, every glance exchanged in the hallway, every file forgotten on a desk seemed to hide something that, somehow, might be connected to the letter she had found. And at the center of it all was him, Alexander Carter, cold, enigmatic, and now, absurdly present in her thoughts. He was no longer just the untouchable millionaire gracing the pages of financial magazines. To her, He was the unconscious guardian of a truth that could shatter everything they knew about their own pasts. Emily tried to avoid him as always. She would slip through the hallways, swap her shifts when she could, even avoid walking near his office. But fate seemed determined to place them in the same space, as if the universe were staging an invisible play where both were the main characters. And on one of those nights, the inevitable encounter happened. She was picking up documents from the meeting room floor when he entered, unannounced. He looked more tired than usual, his gaze distant, but still full of authority. For a moment, their eyes met. Time seemed to slow down. There was a silent unease in that exchange of glances, something heavier than words, more truthful than any facade. Emily quickly looked away and made a motion to leave, but he said nothing. He just watched. And in that tense silence, a seed was planted. Alexander had begun to notice her presence in a different way. Until then, she had just been part of the background, someone who went unnoticed like so many other functional pieces in his machinery of power. But something had changed. She seemed troubled, tense, as if hiding something. He, used to deciphering intentions and lies in courtrooms, recognized the signs. He began to watch her discreetly, wondering who this woman was with the melancholic gaze and restrained steps. Emily, on the other hand, struggled against the urge to confront him. She wanted answers but feared the consequences. Part of her insisted that the secret wasn't hers, that she should return the letter and pretend nothing had happened. The other part, deeper and fiercer, whispered that there was more to it, a truth that needed to come to light. Their interactions became more frequent, a forgotten paper that she handed over silently, a lingering glance that lasted too long, a hesitation to leave the room when he entered, and little by little, that invisible wall between them began to crack. But what was growing there wasn't simple closeness. It was a subtle tension, made of unspoken suspicions, swallowed words, gestures that carried hidden meanings. Alexander began to sense that something was wrong, and Emily knew she couldn't carry that secret much longer. He was getting closer, and the closer he got, the more she felt that the final confrontation wasn't a distant possibility, but an inevitable promise. There were nights when Emily would wake up startled, with the feeling of being watched, not out of fear, but because something was pulling her into that mystery. And amid the exhausting routine, the two orbited around the same center, the past, the secret, the letter. There were still no words between them, but a story was being written in silence. And when that silence was finally broken, neither of them would emerge unscathed. The line separating them was beginning to disappear, not by choice, but by destiny. The office, once a refuge of orders and cold business, now felt more like a prison for Emily. Every step she took, every document she signed, felt like she was sinking deeper into the web that was forming between her and Alexander. The letter, the reason for all the emotional turmoil she tried to suppress, was still carefully kept, but the burden of carrying it seemed to grow heavier each day. She knew that at some point she would have to face the truth, but the fear of the consequences paralyzed her. On the other hand, Alexander seemed to be getting closer to understanding what was going on. He noticed the anxiety in Emily's eyes, the way she dodged his casual questions, as if hiding something bigger than herself. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he sensed it, and it unsettled him. Alexander, who had always trusted his ability to control situations and people, now felt lost when it came to her. There was a disconnect between the image he had built of Emily and the reality that was slowly unfolding, like a puzzle refusing to be completed. On a quiet morning, he watched her from the corner of the room. Emily was absorbed in her thoughts, lost in the papers on her desk, but her eyes were distant, as if she were in another place, another life. That fleeting, almost imperceptible moment was enough for doubt to take root in Alexander's mind. Something in him wanted to know more about her, not just the woman who cleaned the hallways or organized the documents, but the woman behind the facade. Who was she really? What did she carry with her? He wanted to understand, wanted to unravel the enigma she represented. It was on one of those afternoons, while she was drinking coffee in the small break room, that the confrontation began to take shape. Emily sensed a presence behind her and turned around. He was there, standing in the doorway, his gaze intense, almost penetrating. But it wasn't just the intensity of his stare that paralyzed her. It was the feeling that, in that moment, he knew more than she would have liked. She didn't know what he knew, but her intuition told her he was closer to the truth than she had imagined. "Do you have something to tell me, Emily?" Alexander's voice was firm, but there was something unexpected in it. It wasn't a command, but a question filled with silent doubt, an invitation for her to reveal herself. The silence that followed was thick. Emily didn't know what to say. All she wanted was to disappear in that moment. Disappear and let the world move on without her. But the universe wouldn't let her run. Not yet. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, the words sounding weaker than she intended. But something in his eyes made her lie feel even more hollow. He said nothing, but stepped closer slowly. He wasn't aggressive, but his presence was almost suffocating. He didn't touch her, but his gaze touched her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. She knew he didn't believe her. And more importantly, she knew he wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth she was desperately trying to hide. In that moment, something changed between them. It was no longer just a game of disguises, of forced smiles and diverted glances. It was a real exchange, a power game in which they were both involved, even if they didn't yet know how far it would go. Emily, deep down, knew she couldn't keep running. But the fear of what would happen if she gave in to that game, if she revealed the truth, was stronger than anything. She didn't want to lose control. She didn't want to lose everything she had built so far. Alexander, in turn, felt a growing curiosity, but also a discomfort he couldn't explain. Something about her challenged him, something he couldn't understand. But what disturbed him the most was the fact that, despite all his power and control, he couldn't figure her out. And that unsettled him more than any hidden secret. He wanted more. He needed more. The day seemed to unfold like any other. But for Emily, every minute carried a weight she could no longer bear. She could no longer pretend to be immune to Alexander's curiosity, nor ignore the piercing looks he kept giving her. More and more, he pressed her, not with words, but in the subtle actions he took. Every word from him, no matter how casual, seemed to carry an unexpected weight. And Emily knew this moment would come, the moment when the secret she had been trying to hide would be revealed. She felt she was about to be exposed, and with that, she would lose any remaining control she still had over the situation. And it was in one of those moments of unbearable tension, on a night when the rain pounded hard against the office windows, that everything happened. Alexander sought her out again. She was alone, as usual, organizing stacks of documents, trying to distract herself from what was about to happen. But he didn't walk away this time. He entered the room with the same impassive demeanor as always, but there was something different in his eyes, something darker, more resolute. "Emily," he said, his voice lower but firm. She looked at him, her heart pounding faster. She knew he already knew something, and the realization that the end was near made her lose her composure. She didn't reply, just stared at him, waiting for his next move. "I know you're hiding something from me." The words dropped heavily into the air, like a death sentence. There was no room left for denial or escape. The game, which until then had been a silent exchange of looks and feelings, had now become a direct confrontation. He watched her, waiting for a reaction, waiting for her to finally surrender to the truth she had tried to keep hidden. Emily didn't know what to do. All she felt was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She knew she could no longer lie, could no longer carry the burden of the hidden letter, but the thought of losing everything she had built, everything she thought was safe in her life, terrified her. With a deep breath, she gave in. "The letter," she murmured. Those words were like a key unlocking a door Emily feared would never be closed again. She felt the relief of finally speaking the truth, but at the same time, the pain of the inevitable consequence that would follow. "You found it?" Alexander asked, his tone softer, almost as if he was trying to understand more than simply extract a confession. But he wouldn't be satisfied with a vague answer. "What does it mean to me, Emily?" He stepped closer to her with firm steps, eyes locked on her face, but showing no anger, only a growing curiosity, and a sense that now, he was beginning to understand the pieces of this complex puzzle. The letter was the key, yes, but not only to her secret. It was also the key to a past she had tried to bury. The truth didn't just involve her life, it involved his as well. And in that moment, Emily realized the two of them were more intertwined than she had ever imagined. The secret she carried, though painful and personal, was also connected to Alexander's own past. He remained silent, waiting for the explanation. She felt that the moment to speak about her brother's disappearance and Richard Hale's involvement was about to arrive, but she also knew that would destroy any shred of normalcy she still clung to. She no longer knew what to say, or how to say it. Shame overwhelmed her, but the need to free herself from the emotional burden forced her to take the next step. I found the letter in your office. It was left for me, but it wasn't just any letter. It contains information about my brother, and about you. I didn't know what to do with it. I thought about burning it, about forgetting it, but Emily choked up, the weight of the revelation already beginning to take form. Alexander watched her with a closed expression. He wasn't surprised, but extremely focused. Now, the truth was out, but he knew the hardest part was still to come. Richard Hale, she continued, her voice trembling. He has something to do with this. My brother's disappearance, and your loss. The final word caught in Emily's throat like a sharp blade. She knew that revelation wouldn't just affect her, but also Alexander, who was now beginning to see that what he had imagined to be just a simple letter might actually be the thread of a much larger, far more complex web. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander was stunned, his mind trying to process the information. He didn't know what to think or how to react. Emily's words echoed in his mind, but he also knew this revelation would change everything. What he knew about his own past, about his future with Emily, about the secret Richard Hale had kept buried. Now, the consequences of all this were about to start unfolding, and with them, the truth of a connection neither of them had ever imagined. The atmosphere in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken words and truths that were finally exposed. Emily and Alexander now stood before the abyss, with the letter that had started the entire upheaval in their lives laid out before them. Both knew what was to come would not be easy. The truth, with its raw and relentless light, had destroyed the illusion they had built until that moment. The tension between them was palpable, like a thread about to snap at any second. Emily looked at Alexander, her heart racing, her hands trembling, but she no longer cared about the fear. It was too late to turn back. She had nowhere left to run. Alexander, for his part, was in shock. He felt a mixture of anger, pain, and confusion. Emily's words reverberated through his mind, but he knew that, unlike what he had thought, the problem didn't lie with her alone. It lay with himself, too, with a past he had never wanted to face. What she had revealed about Richard Hale, about his past and the role he had played in Emily's brother's disappearance, wasn't something he could simply ignore. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together, but each new revelation opened more doors to uncertainty. I never imagined this was connected to me. I didn't know about Richard's involvement with your brother, or about what happened. All I knew was what he told me. Alexander was tense, his voice cracking through the stiffness of his expression. He was beginning to realize that the trust he thought he had in his partner was about to be irreversibly shattered. Emily didn't know what to say. The man in front of her, the man with whom she had shared so many intense moments, was no longer the same. Now he seemed just as lost as she was, a victim of circumstance and a past that could not be erased. But in that moment, she also knew that the only way to move forward was to face the truth head-on, with no more evasions. I can't change what happened, Emily said with a firmness she barely recognized in her own voice. But I know that if we're going to stay together, we need to deal with it. We can't keep living in the shadows of the past. The letter, it was a warning, a chance for us to be more than what the world expected of us. We need to break free, Alexander. The sound of the heavy rain, which had once felt like mere background noise, now seemed like music echoing the internal transformation of them both. They had reached a turning point where there was no more hiding their truths, no more escaping the fate that awaited them. In a nearly desperate impulse, Alexander stepped forward, his hands touching the surface of the table where the letter lay, as if simply touching it could seal the decision forming in his mind. He looked into Emily's eyes, no longer with coldness, but with a sincerity he knew she never expected to see. He was willing to change. He was willing to break down the barriers that had kept him distant, to confront the man he had become, and the truth he had ignored for so long. I want to do this. I want to face everything Richard Hale did, and the consequences of it. I can't change the past, but I can change the future. And what I know now is that if there's one thing I need to do, it's to make things right. With you, Emily, I want to help you find your brother. I want to do whatever it takes so that we can move forward." Alexander's voice was filled with a new determination, one born of pain and loss, but now transforming into something stronger, more powerful. Emily looked at him in silence, feeling a knot loosen in her chest. His vulnerability, the visible pain in his eyes, were the final keys that unlocked the resistance she had been keeping inside. She had always known their pasts were intertwined, but she had never imagined it would be in this way. And now, standing before him, she felt that the choice they were both making, to face the inevitable and join forces to uncover the whole plot, was the only chance they had not to lose each other. "Then let's do this together," Emily said with a shy but meaningful smile. "Let's put an end to this. Let's find your partner and deal with what he did. Not just to me, but to you as well." The relief she felt in saying those words was almost physical. It was as if a layer of pain and uncertainty had been peeled away from their hearts. For the first time, she believed that the truth, no matter how devastating, could be the key to freedom. And looking at Alexander, she knew that no matter what came next, they were now in this journey together. What the future held for them, no one could predict. But the only thing that mattered now was that they were ready to face whatever came. Meeting with Alexander on one of their quietest afternoons, in the cold and lifeless conference room, Emily decided that despite all the emotional chaos still swirling inside her, she had to move forward. It wouldn't be easy, but she knew he needed answers, and that Richard Hale still held the key to the entire mystery. She no longer wanted to be a passive spectator of her own pain. The search for the truth, no matter how painful, would start now. "We can't stand still anymore, Alexander. I need to find my brother. I don't know if Hale has anything to do with it, but we need to find out." Alexander, who had been so determined to help her in the previous weeks, didn't hesitate to agree. He could no longer hide how much this case affected him too. Something inside him, regarding Emily, had changed, and he found himself willing to do anything to help her find answers. Hale's words, still echoing in his mind, made him question how well he really knew the people around him, and even his own past. "We're in this together, Emily. We'll find Hale, and hopefully the answers you've been searching for. I'll move all the necessary pieces to make it happen." The first step was to gather as much information as possible. Emily spent her days digging through old files and documents, while Alexander used his contacts and his vast network of resources to track down any clues about Hale's whereabouts. With each passing day, the questions multiplied. Why was Hale hiding? What was he afraid of? And why had he become so obsessed with Emily's past? The silence between them was heavy, but at the same time productive. Emily and Alexander began to connect in a more intimate way, not just through the investigation, but through the simple fact that they shared the burden of their pasts. As Emily delved deeper into documents from her childhood and her brother's disappearance, Alexander, in turn, found himself forced to confront the reality that his family, and his own company, had deeper, darker connections to Hale than he had ever imagined. It was on one of those sleepless nights, when they were both absorbed in their respective research, that Emily finally looked at him. Something had changed in how she saw him. He was no longer just the distant billionaire she had met in the beginning. Now, Alexander seemed more human, more vulnerable, and with that, more attractive. "I never imagined we'd be doing this, Alexander. I never thought that, after everything, you and I would be here together, investigating this mess," she said with a tired but genuine smile. He looked at her with a gaze that reflected more than words could say. He knew what was at stake, for her and for him. Pieces of his past, his insecurities and pain were surfacing, and despite everything, a connection much stronger than mere camaraderie was forming between them. Maybe deep down, it was inevitable. The way he saw her, and the way she now saw him, was no longer the same. "I never imagined it either. But now that we're in this together, Emily, I think we're stronger than we thought," he replied, his tone soft but firm. In that moment, both felt that something deep was being born between them. But at the same time, the mystery surrounding Hale pulled them back to reality. The search had to continue. The night moved on, and the clock kept ticking. The pressure was rising as new clues emerged, connecting Hale to increasingly dark places. Emily and Alexander realized they were getting close to something big and dangerous. Perhaps more than just finding answers about Emily's brother, They were on the edge of something much more complex, the true face of Richard Hale and his dark schemes. Soon, the investigation would intensify, and the two would need to act fast. The growing tension was also beginning to shape the feelings between them. The physical and emotional closeness between Emily and Alexander was becoming clearer each day, but they both knew that before taking any other step, they needed to face the shadows of Hale's past. That's what united them now, the desire for justice, and the invisible thread that was slowly connecting them more intensely. After days of intense research, Emily and Alexander decided it was time to take action. No longer confined to offices or meetings, they launched into a more hands-on and direct investigation. Richard Hale, still at large, had left traces that, although discreet, hinted at where he might have been hiding over the years. Emily, determined to discover the truth about her brother's disappearance, knew that the only way to find answers was to unearth Hale's dark past. And Alexander, now just as involved in the search as she was ready to do whatever it took to help. The first stop in their investigation led them to an old warehouse outside the city, a place Hale had used at some point in his past. The building, now deteriorated and abandoned, gave off the sense that something had been hidden there, or worse, forgotten. Emily walked in front, her steps hesitant but determined. Alexander, always alert, stayed a few steps behind, his watchful eyes constantly scanning, as if any noise could be a sign of imminent danger. As they explored the location, the tension between them was palpable. With every dark room they entered, every winding hallway they followed, the feeling of being watched grew. Emily, aware of the risk they were taking, couldn't help but feel anxious. But there was something else, something she couldn't ignore. The way Alexander looked at her, how he positioned himself to protect her even without her asking, made her heart beat faster. Alexander, in turn, was more aware than ever of how he felt about Emily. He noticed how his presence calmed her in moments of apprehension, and how her strength turned into vulnerability when she became emotionally overwhelmed. Something was happening to him, something he could no longer ignore. He found himself thinking about her in ways he could no longer understand. It was more than admiration or friendship. It was something deeper, more genuine. "Careful, Emily," he said softly as she approached a broken wall, searching for a hidden clue. His hand brushed against hers for a second. A simple touch, but one that made her body react in an unexpected way. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and something unspoken seemed to pass between them. But before either of them could analyze the meaning of that moment, Emily quickly pulled her hand away. "I know what I'm doing, Alexander. We're going to find something here," she responded, her voice firmer than she truly felt. He knew she was trying to appear strong, but there was something vulnerable in her eyes, something he couldn't ignore. Over the following days, the two explored more places Hale had visited, each revealing more about the web of manipulation and deceit the billionaire had built over the years. Each clue, each document they found, seemed to lead to a new layer of Hale's past, and another piece of an increasingly complex puzzle. With each new step of the investigation, the closeness between Emily and Alexander grew. Accidental touches became more frequent. She began to trust him more, allowing herself to relax in his presence in a way she never had before. He, in turn, became more protective, more attentive to her every move, and it wasn't just because of the investigation. He cared in a way that went beyond simple friendship. He didn't yet know how to define what he was feeling, but he was starting to realize that the attraction he felt for her was more than just a spark. One night, after a long day of searching, Emily and Alexander were sitting in a local cafe, going over the information they had found. The warmth of the coffee cups contrasted with the cold they both felt in their bodies and hearts. The soft light from the lamp above illuminated their faces, creating an almost intimate atmosphere, as if the world around them had disappeared. "You know, I never imagined I'd be doing this with anyone, let alone with you," Emily said, looking at Alexander with a tired but sincere smile. Alexander watched her closely, noticing the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the strength she still carried. He couldn't help but feel a growing admiration for her, and in that moment, he wished he could protect that woman from all the pain in the world. "Me neither, but I'm glad to be here with you, Emily." His voice was soft, yet full of emotion. He had never said something so direct before, but he felt it was true. He was, in fact, happy to be by her side. That night marked a turning point. The tension between them, which had previously manifested in more subtle ways, now felt ready to explode at any moment. They were closer than ever, and the investigation, although still lacking complete answers, was bringing them together in unexpected ways. What once seemed like a professional partnership now had something more, something that both of them, though not yet fully admitting it, could feel. In the following days, the clues began leading Emily and Alexander to a new location, an isolated house outside the city that Hale might have used as a hideout. The sense that they were getting close to a major revelation kept them going, but the emotional closeness they now shared also made them more vulnerable. They couldn't deny that something was changing between them, and each new step in the investigation, each discovery, seemed to bring them closer to a truth they didn't know how to handle. The days following the search in the isolated house were marked by a growing atmosphere of tension, not only due to the constant hunt for clues about Hale's whereabouts, but also because of the emotional weight both were carrying. Emily and Alexander, increasingly close, felt a thin line between friendship and what seemed to be an undeniable, though not yet fully understood, attraction. They were becoming more deeply involved in the search, but the very process of investigation was bringing to the surface deep and even complex emotions neither of them had anticipated. One night, after another day full of revelations and twists in the investigation, Emily and Alexander found themselves in a particularly tense situation. They had visited a location where they believed Richard Hale might have hidden in the past, an old mansion, nearly deserted, that seemed to have been completely abandoned for years. The gloomy atmosphere and the feeling of being watched intensified as they searched through the dark and silent rooms, looking for clues that might lead them to Hale. The air of apprehension and danger seemed to mirror the tension between them. In every corner of the mansion, in every empty room, the sense of being on the verge of something much greater consumed them. And as they moved through the mansion, the fear of being observed grew, but what was beginning to form between them could no longer be ignored. It was then, upon discovering a secret room in the mansion's basement, that Emily was struck by a wave of claustrophobia, the tension of the moment tightening her chest. She felt the weight of responsibility, and the pain of being so close to the truth, yet not knowing what to do with it. The fear of what they might find, and the growing frustration of not knowing how to move forward, overwhelmed her. Alexander, noticing Emily's anxiety, couldn't hold back. He approached her, his hands trembling slightly, no longer from nerves, but from the intensity of what he felt. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something erupted between them. Alexander felt an uncontrollable urge to hold her, to comfort her, to chase away all the shadows that seemed to surround her. He reached out and touched her arm gently, as if searching for an anchor in the middle of the chaos. "Emily," his voice was husky, softer than she expected, but filled with an unspoken longing, something they had both been avoiding. The closeness between them made her heart beat faster, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to vanish. Emily looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting a whirlwind of emotions. She was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, and the pressure of the moment seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. But when she saw his expression, something inside her broke. She felt a deep connection with Alexander, something beyond her understanding or control. His gaze, so intense and sincere, made her realize she could no longer deny what was happening between them. Without saying a word, their bodies moved even closer, the attraction between them palpable. The air around them felt thick, and Emily, no longer able to resist, gave in to the pull of her own desire. When their lips met, it was as if the entire world had stopped. The kiss was intense and frenzied, charged with all the unspoken emotions, repressed feelings, and built-up frustration. It was a mutual surrender, as if they were both finally acknowledging the truth of their feelings. When they pulled apart, their faces remained close, hearts racing. They were breathless, not only from the intensity of the moment, but from the revelation that had just unfolded between them. Emily looked at Alexander, feeling a mix of relief and confusion, while he gazed at her with an intensity he no longer tried to hide. I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't deny that I need you, Emily." And his words were sincere, and the sound of his voice, so full of emotion, made Emily's heart race. She in turn didn't know what to say. In many moments of her life, she had learned to control her emotions, but now, by his side, everything felt out of control, and that terrified her, but it also made her feel alive in a way she never had before. I didn't expect this, Alexander. I don't know what to do with all of this. Her voice trembled, but there was a vulnerability there she didn't usually show. Yet, looking into his eyes, she felt that maybe she didn't need to have all the answers in that moment. They remained silent for a while, simply feeling each other's presence. And then, without a word, they left the secret room and headed to the car. The tension between them had not lessened, but now there was something more. Something that went beyond the investigation. Something that could change their lives in an irreversible way. The search for Richard Hale had consumed every day of the past few months, and with each clue that emerged, the web of lies and manipulation he had carefully woven over time became clearer. Emily and Alexander, now more united than ever, had followed several false leads, but at last, a crucial tip had brought them to an isolated location, an old estate in the mountains, far from everything and everyone. The place had an aura of abandonment, as if time no longer moved there, and the sense that they were finally close to uncovering the truth weighed heavily on them. As soon as they arrived, the place was so dark and silent, it felt like a scene straight out of a nightmare. The estate was surrounded by a tall iron fence, and the mansion, though old, still gave off a feeling of desolation that made Emily's and Alexander's hearts race. With each step they took toward the entrance, they both knew that moment could change everything. The truth about Emily's brother's disappearance was just meters away, and with it, the revelation of who Hale really was, and why he had done what he did. The rusty gate creaked as Alexander pushed it open, and the house before them seemed to be waiting for a final revelation. They knew Richard Hale was there, but where? Emily felt a growing pressure in her chest, as if each beat of her heart was a silent warning of what was to come. But she wouldn't back down anymore. Nothing could stop her search for the truth, not even the feelings growing between her and Alexander. As they entered the mansion, the scene was bleak. Dust and cobwebs covered the aging furniture, and the smell of mold hung in the air, as if life there had ended years ago. But despite the abandoned appearance, there were clear signs that Hale was still living there. Some objects were out of place, as if he had moved them recently, and the house lights, though dim, were still on. Finally, after walking through the main hallway, a massive wooden door opened in front of them, revealing a rustic office. There sat Richard Hale, behind a huge desk, staring directly at them. The silence was broken by the sound of his voice, low, but filled with coldness. "I knew you'd come. There's no point searching anymore. You already know what will happen." The tension in the air was palpable, like a storm about to break. Emily, heart pounding in her chest, stepped forward, her voice firm despite the fear still pulsing through her veins. "Where is my brother?" Her voice trembled, but she was determined to get the answer she so desperately wanted. Hale, who until then had seemed confident, hesitated for a brief moment, but he quickly returned to his cold and calculated demeanor. "Your brother is where he needs to be. I only took him out of the way to ensure my own safety." The revelation was like a direct blow to Emily's heart. Richard Hale had not only kidnapped her brother, but he had acted with unthinkable cruelty, without a hint of remorse. But there was something else in his words that left her stunned. The reason behind his actions seemed even darker than she could have imagined. As Emily struggled to control the rage rising inside her, Alexander at her side felt the tension in every muscle of his body. With each word from Hale, he became more convinced that the man before them was far more dangerous than they had imagined. He wasn't just responsible for Emily's suffering. He was manipulating everything around him for his own ends, with no regard for the lives he destroyed. "Tell me where he is, Hale." Alexander's voice sounded threatening, and his protective stance intensified. He moved closer to Emily, as if wanting to shield her, but also to pressure Hale into telling the truth. Hale, however, remained unmoved. The expression on his face showed no remorse, only a cold arrogance that made Emily's stomach turn. "What I did to survive, Emily. Your brother was just a piece in my game, but you're more complicated. I can't let you interfere." Hale's words hung heavily in the air, and for the first time, Emily began to understand the complexity of the man standing in front of her. He wasn't just an ordinary villain, but someone playing a much bigger game than she had ever imagined. The confrontation continued, and Hale's words became more chaotic as he began to reveal fragments of his own past, his selfish motivations, and the manipulations that had brought him to that point. He wasn't just hiding Emily's brother. He had also dragged others into his web of lies, creating a tangle of deceit he believed was impossible to unravel. But even in the face of Hale's coldness and the mounting tension, something inside Emily ignited. She was stronger now, more determined than ever to save her brother, and somehow confront the evil that Hale represented. She knew the confrontation wouldn't be easy, but with Alexander by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The relationship between Emily and Hale, now laden with bitterness and betrayal, grew more conflicted with each passing minute, but the truth was finally about to surface, and with it, the chance to free her brother and redirect the course of her life. The tension in the room reached its peak when Richard Hale finally decided to speak. His cold, impassive posture now contrasted with the turmoil he felt inside. He knew he was about to lose control of the situation, but there was no way to hide the truth any longer. Emily, her heart racing and eyes locked on him, waited anxiously for the revelation that would change everything. Alexander, beside her, remained silent, aware that Hale's words might be the key to freeing Emily's brother, and at the same time, unveiling deep secrets from their past. Hale sighed, as if weighing each word before finally releasing them, and said, "Your brother. He wasn't just hiding. I kept him captive for reasons far more personal than you can imagine. It wasn't just a power play. He knew too much, Emily. He knew my secrets, my mistakes, and I knew that if I let him go, everything I had built would be destroyed." Hale's words cut through the air, and Emily felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. What she had heard up to that point had already been horrible enough, but this was even more devastating. Her brother hadn't just disappeared because of one of Hale's whims. He had been imprisoned, kept captive because he knew something Hale could never allow the world to find out. She took a step back, feeling the pain of a cruel reality. Her hands trembled, and her eyes began to fill with tears, but she couldn't afford to cry. Not now. Not when the truth was finally being revealed. You did this because you were afraid he'd say something? And how did that help you? How do you live with that? Emily's voice was broken, but steady. She felt a rising anger, but also a sense of helplessness, as if everything she had ever known about her life had been a lie. Richard Hale leaned forward, his expression unchanged, but his eyes, once so cold, now showed a glimpse of something deeper, perhaps remorse, or even fear. "I did what I did because, deep down, Emily, I was trying to protect something bigger than you can imagine. Things were never that simple. The truth your brother knew wasn't just about me, it was about the entire world. What he knew could have destroyed a lot of people, and in some twisted way, I thought I was protecting all of us." But Hale's explanation didn't ease the pain Emily felt. Every word was another blow, opening old wounds she hadn't even known were still there. The truth, though liberating, carried the weight of loss, pain, and regret. Her brother had been a crucial piece in a game she had never wanted to understand, and now she found herself consumed by an indescribable anguish. She had grown up with absence as a constant companion. Now, the truth didn't erase the pain. It only changed its shape. She looked at Alexander, her eyes filled with tears, but also a renewed determination. He was there, by her side, his eyes fixed on her, as if he knew what she was feeling, as if he understood the burden she carried. Without saying a word, he stepped forward and took her hand. His touch was what Emily needed to ground herself in the moment, to keep from getting lost in the pain. He was there, and that was enough. "You're not alone, Emily. We're in this together. We're going to find your brother, get him out of this nightmare, and then you'll be able to rewrite your story, rewrite your future, and I'll be by your side every step of the way," said Alexander, his voice soft but filled with conviction. Those words were like a balm to Emily, somehow healing the wounds left open by the cruel truth. She knew there was still so much to do, so much to resolve, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone in the fight anymore. The search for the truth had now become a mission she and Alexander shared, and nothing could tear them apart. Richard Hale, now silent, watched the couple, but it seemed he had already lost the battle, even if he hadn't been completely defeated yet. Emily, with Alexander's unwavering support, felt her determination growing stronger by the second. The truth had come to light, and now more than ever, she knew what needed to be done. Free her brother, confront Richard Hale, and finally face the shadows of the past, But she also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The pain was still there, and the weight of what her brother had endured would stay with her. Yet now, with Alexander by her side, she felt more capable than ever of moving forward. Together, they could rewrite their stories and perhaps build a future where love, loyalty, and truth were the pillars of a new life. The truth stood there, in all its cruelty, but also as a key to freedom, and Emily was ready to use it. After Hale's painful revelation, Emily was left in a whirlwind of emotions. The truth, as devastating as it was, had freed her from a life of uncertainty. But one question remained. Where was Ethan? She knew Hale had the answers, but she still didn't know where he had kept him hidden all these years. It was in that moment, with the power of the truth now in her hands, that Emily decided to confront Hale one final time. She knew that, to find her brother, she would have to use the knowledge she now held about Hale's own fears and weaknesses. With Alexander's help, Emily had an intense conversation with Richard Hale, one last attempt to get what she needed. The confrontation, once again, wasn't easy. They pressured Hale, showing him that, now that the truth was exposed, he no longer had any power over her. Hale's desperate attempts to justify himself only enraged Emily even more, but in a moment of weakness, he revealed where Ethan was being kept. With no options left, Hale admitted that his hiding place was a remote property, an isolated farm where he kept Emily's brother under strict control, away from the world. He expressed regret for his cruelty, though selfishly, seeking only to escape the consequences of his actions. That was when Emily, with Alexander's unconditional support, felt that the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The pain of the past was now turning into action. She knew that freeing her brother was the only way to truly close that chapter of her life, and as much as the truth about Hale had shaken her, it had also made her stronger. She wouldn't let any more time be lost. With a plan in mind, she and Alexander set off for the isolated property, ready to finally bring Ethan home. Emily and Alexander's relentless search finally led them to the place where her brother was being held. After days of investigation, they managed to trace a network of clues and information that led them to a small, secluded property where Hale's darkest secret had been hidden. The air was thick with tension. The wind howled through the trees around them, and the silence was broken only by the soft steps of Emily and Alexander, who moved with caution. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and hope. The moment she had waited for all these years was finally within reach, but she knew it would be a test of her courage and of the truth she now carried. When they finally entered the small cabin that had served as a prison, Emily could barely believe what she was seeing. Her brother Ethan was there, in a dark corner, his eyes deeply tired, but alive. He recognized her immediately. His eyes widened, and a sigh of relief escaped his lips. Emily could barely hold back her tears, but no words came out. Emily ran. Her legs barely obeyed. When she saw Ethan, she dropped to her knees, and without thinking, without fear. His touch was real, warm. Ethan. She didn't finish the sentence. She cried. He looked at her like someone who had returned from a place no one should ever know. "You found me," he said. "I thought I'd never see you again." The relief Emily felt was so overwhelming that she could barely hold back her tears. Years of uncertainty and pain now melted away before her, and the joy that filled her heart was immense. She held him tightly, as if afraid that somehow he might disappear again. Alexander, who had been observing the reunion from a short distance, felt a wave of compassion and respect for Emily. He knew that this moment would be transformative for her, a turning point where she could finally begin the healing process. He approached gently, and without saying a word, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Emily looked at him, and for a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that gaze was a silent connection, a mutual understanding that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan, still dazed, looked at Alexander, and with a tired smile, expressed his gratitude. "Thank you, man. I don't know how you did it, but you brought me back to her." It was as if Ethan's words were setting the tone for what that moment truly meant. The restoration not only of a family bond, but also of the hope and love that had been denied to them for so long. The sense of justice and freedom filled the air, and Emily knew that this reunion marked the first page of a new story for all of them. The days that followed were a period of intense recovery for Ethan, who, although free, still needed time to heal emotionally. But with Emily's support, Alexander's presence, and his own determination to overcome the trauma, he began taking the first steps toward healing. Emily, in turn, dedicated herself to her brother with a passion she didn't even know she possessed. Yet she also realized that her own healing was tied to that journey. Alexander's love and unwavering support never left her side. He was there, not just as a lover, but as a pillar of strength. During those days, the three of them formed an even deeper bond. Ethan, still processing everything he had been through, began sharing small details about his time in captivity, and Emily listened with patience. Together, they started to rebuild the story they had lost, and slowly, the wounds of the past began to close. Alexander, for his part, became more present, not only physically, but emotionally. He understood that his role in this process wasn't just to support, but to offer Emily the space she needed to grow and overcome. He respected her need to be with her brother, but also knew, deep down, that it would only strengthen their bond. In the end, he became not just part of Emily's healing, but an essential part of her new story. That moment of liberation, healing, and reconciliation transformed what once had been a nightmare into a new beginning. For Emily and her brother, the future now seemed possible. And with Alexander by her side, she knew there would be no more insurmountable barriers, only the promise of a renewed love and a brighter future. Emily's reunion with Ethan was undoubtedly the beginning of a new phase in her life. And with Alexander's presence, she felt for the first time that she had the tools and the support to move forward. Together, they were ready to rewrite their stories. With Emily's brother finally free and the mysteries unraveled, Emily and Alexander felt a deep sense of relief. The weight that had bound them for so many tense and uncertain days began to lift, allowing them to connect on a deeper level, beyond the challenges they had faced together. The sense of victory wasn't just about justice being served, it was also about the bond that now connected them in an irreversible way. One night, while celebrating Ethan's freedom and the closure of everything they had lived through, Emily and Alexander found themselves in a private moment, far from all the responsibilities and tensions that had dominated their lives in recent months. The atmosphere was calm, and the emotional distance that had existed between them, caused by the difficult circumstances they had endured, began to fade away. In a moment of vulnerability, Alexander finds himself facing an internal dilemma. He feels that the time has come to express what he has long kept inside. Emily's eyes, which always looked at him with a mix of gratitude and caution, now reflect something more, something he once feared, but now fully understands: love. He can no longer hide his feelings, and the urgency to speak the truth is stronger than anything else. In an unexpected but sincere gesture, Alexander takes Emily's hand, and with a deep, emotion-filled gaze, confesses his deepest feelings. He speaks about how she changed his life, how she made him believe once again in his ability to love and surrender. He recalls the moments when, even on the worst days, she was the strength that kept him standing. And finally, he kneels before her, pulling from his pocket a box with a ring that sparkles under the soft glow of the night. "Emily, I can't imagine my life without you. Everything we've been through, all the hardships we faced. I fell in love with you in the midst of it all. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, making you happy. Emily, will you marry me?" The silence that follows is palpable. Emily, her eyes brimming with emotion, feels the anxiety of so many years and the fear of surrendering to love finally dissolve. She smiles, not just because of the proposal, but because of the transformation they have lived through together. What began as a search for justice and revenge had now turned into something much more beautiful and profound. "Yes, Alexander, yes. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side." The kiss that follows is gentle but full of promises and expectations for the future. The world around them may be uncertain, but in that moment, they know the love they share is stronger than any adversity. With the weight of the past finally lifted and a sense of justice restored, Emily finds a new purpose in her life. Now that the secret about her brother has been revealed, and her love with Alexander has blossomed, she feels it's time to free herself even more by diving into what she always dreamed of: writing. She realizes that her story, full of pain, loss, and resilience, is unique and can inspire others who, like her, have faced seemingly insurmountable challenges. The first important decision she makes is to enroll in the literature program at a university. Emily, who had always dreamed of becoming a writer, knows now is the time to invest in her talent and pursue a formal education. Although at first she feels insecure due to her lack of academic experience, she is driven by the belief that she can turn her life experiences into work that deeply touches others. As she begins her journey in college, Emily throws herself into her studies. She finds a new environment where she can grow not only as a writer, but also as an intellectual. She makes friends who share her love for words and literature, and over the semesters, she stands out for her emotional and honest writing. The pain she once felt is now transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. Every page was a mirror. Writing was no longer an escape. It was reconstruction. Emily didn't want people to read her pain. She wanted them to feel her courage. During one of her classes, she begins writing a book that gradually reveals itself to be more than just a simple work of fiction. Her book, inspired by her own story and the lessons she learned along the way, starts to take shape. Emily pours the best of herself into the work, not only in the content, but also in the relentless pursuit of meaning and truth that had always been present in her life. When the book is finally published, it achieves instant success. The work is acclaimed by both critics and the public, being hailed as a true masterpiece of contemporary literature. Emily receives invitations to speak about her book at literary conferences, and her writing becomes admired and respected, establishing her as a renowned author. Amidst all this success, Alexander is by her side, prouder than ever. He witnesses Emily's transformation from a woman marked by her past into a strong and independent writer who has found her true voice and place in the world. He had always supported her on her journey, but now he sees with fresh eyes how much she has evolved, both personally and professionally. Alexander, with his protective and caring nature, feels pride not only in the incredible woman Emily has become, but also in the courage with which she chose to follow her dreams, even after so many hardships. He supports her every step of the way, whether with words of encouragement or with his constant emotional presence. Emily is no longer just a survivor, but a powerful woman capable of transforming suffering into art. She finds peace not only in Alexander's love, but also in fulfilling a dream that had always been within her reach, but once felt impossible. Her rise as a writer and scholar reflects how much she has grown, healed, and freed herself from the weight of the past. After all the challenges they faced and overcame, Emily and Alexander finally find the peace and happiness they had always longed for. Emily, now a successful author, sees her work acclaimed across the globe. Her journey, which began in pain and uncertainty, culminates in a life that reflects everything she always desired: success, self-confidence, and the realization of her dreams. She continues her academic career, respected not only as a writer, but also as an intellectual who transformed her scars into wisdom. Alexander, in turn, has found a new balance in his life. Once consumed by the shadows of the past, he is now lighter, more connected with his emotions, and more open to moving forward. The weight of his past no longer defines him, and he is able to fully live in the present alongside Emily. The support he gave her throughout the entire process was transformative, and as a result, he too redefines himself as a more complete, stronger, and more loving man. The greatest symbol of this transformation comes with the marriage of Emily and Alexander. The ceremony is an intimate and emotional event, held in a location meaningful to both, a place that represented the new beginning of their lives, far from the shadows of the past. Surrounded by loved ones and those who had followed their personal journeys, the couple exchanges heartfelt vows, promising to continue building a future together without allowing the adversities of the past to define them. It is a moment of celebration, not only of their love, but also of the story they wrote together, marked by resilience, forgiveness, and renewal. As the couple shares their first kiss as husband and wife, Emily's words echo in both their minds. The past may have shaped us, but what we did with it is what defines us. Their love is not merely the reward for all they endured, but a testament to the possibility of starting over, overcoming the toughest obstacles, and building a future full of possibilities. The romance between Emily and Alexander is living proof that even with the heaviest burdens, true happiness can be found. They both know that now they are ready to face any challenge the future may bring, because they have each other and the strength drawn from their own journeys. The happy ending is not just the resolution of their conflicts, but a symbol that second chances truly exist. They began their story as wounded souls, but ended as people who, through love and determination, were able to heal and build a bright future together. For them, love is not just a fairy tale. It is a journey of growth, resilience, and ultimately, redemption.